Hello, and thank you for coming to check out this video. In this video, we're going to take a look at the basic configurations that I have on Site B. And the first thing that we want to do is activate all the services on this cluster. I only have one node in the cluster, so you only have to activate the services on that one node. So what I did was I came in here and I checked the box for check all services, and then I clicked save and got everything activated. The next thing that I did was I went into the trace and then troubleshooting trace settings. And on here, I checked again the box for all services, and that just gets the trace settings for the cluster set up in a really quick and easy way. You may not want to do this in a production environment depending on how your how much processing is done on your cluster. So it might be beneficial to not do this in production depending on your environment. But again, this is a lab series for people that are trying to learn for the CCNP and CCIE collaboration. So in your lab, feel free to go ahead and do this. Now we want to go ahead and jump over to the CM administration webpage. And once that loads up, we're going to go under device settings and go to the common phone profile. In a previous video that I did about ideal settings for a lab environment, I talked about what all I put in here. I put in the secure shell username and password, and then I also enable SSH down a little lower. I enable web access. One thing that I don't remember if I did in that video is enabling these log profile settings. I selected media, network, SIP, telephony, and preset. That is just to enable additional logging on the phones if I need that for any reason. As you can see, SSH access is enabled, web access is enabled, like how I said not too long ago. And then also what I did was under call routing class of control, I created a single partition. That's the internal partition. All these other ones were created by default. So the only one that I created is the internal partition. Also under call routing class of control, calling search space, I created the internal CSS, and so the selected partition I put in there is the internal partition. Now, going under system server, again, there's only one node in this whole cluster. I'm not going to use it for too much. If we go under Cisco Unified CM, something to note here that I did, which I didn't do in cluster 1, is I enabled auto registration. So I unchecked this box, but in order to uncheck that box and get auto registration enabled, you first have to give an ending directory number, and you also have to specify the universal device template and universal line template, which I'm just using these two here that you can see on the screen. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, because there's something that in a lab environment and probably even in a production environment, you're going to want to disable if you are using auto registration. So we'll talk about that setting to disable in just a moment. So another thing is that I didn't create a unified CM group. I'm just using the default CM group, and for the device pool as well, I'm just using the default. Looking at the regions, I didn't configure any there because we already talked about regions and locations in a previous video on cluster 1, and in there we showed what regions and locations are used for, and I believe we did a demonstration of how to make a call fail by the location bandwidth management. Next, we also want to note, right, there's no regions, there's also no locations. At least not that I configured. These ones are on the system by default. And there's also under enterprise parameters some configurations that I did. I did give it a cluster ID that's not the default. I enabled the dependency records. I set that to true. Excuse me. And I went down here and made sure that all these URLs are how I like them to be. I got rid of pretty much all of the secure URLs, so that way I don't have to worry about issues with secure connections. Now let's go ahead and take a look at that setting I was talking about for auto registration. If you go under user management and you go to user/phone add, you go down to universal device template, and then in the auto-registration template there is a bunch of different sections of this, but the one that you really want to go to is the I think it's the service configuration settings. And then for this I just delete it and I set this to 0 because you have to have at least something in there, and then I'll click save. And what that does is if you don't remove that, when the phone connects to the CUCM, that setting right there that we just removed is going to cause something to pop up on the phone screen that's really annoying. And it took me a pretty good while to learn about this right here when I started using newer versions of Call Manager like 10.5.2 and newer. All right, now we got all that out of the way. The next thing that I wanted to show you is that I have only one phone on here. And looking, find phone where directory number, you can see that this phone is using directory number 5000, which is in the internal partition. So if we click on that directory number, you can see that I really haven't done much of anything here. Just put in the internal partition and didn't do anything in terms of any of the other configurations. I didn't even give it a calling search space. So we'll click on this device and click edit device. Now you can see here that I did give the internal CSS on the device. But other than that, I pretty much just used the default for everything. Like the device pool is the default. And we have the universal device template, which just comes with an auto-registered device standard SIP profile. So that was all I really did on this phone. There's no user associated. It's set to anonymous. I don't have LDAP configured on site B. I don't know if I even have an end user. Yeah, I don't even have an end user. So that's basically all of the configurations that I've done so far on this side. There's no gateways, there's no trunks, there's only that one phone. But with this all out of the way, the video is getting a little bit longer than I wanted it to be, so I'll end the recording here and I'll start a new video where I actually will talk about doing integrations between site B and headquarters, and we'll configure some SIP trunks and some H323 trunks to get some intercluster calling done. I hope that you enjoy the series so far, and I'll see you in the next video.